I came home to find Karen had cut a hole in my fence and installed a gate into my backyard, complete with a fake community access plaque. She claimed my yard was now shared space. By morning, her precious gate was gone, replaced by a permanent brick wall that ended her schemes forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway. There was a brand new wooden gate in my backyard fence where there had never been one before. A gate that opened directly from my neighbor Karen's yard into mine. Let me back up and explain how I ended up living next to the neighborhood's most entitled person. I bought my house 6 months earlier, a nice little 3-bedroom place with a big backyard perfect for my dogs. The previous owner had warned me about Karen, but I figured he was just being dramatic. "She's a little pushy," he'd said. "But you seem like you can handle yourself." I should have listened more carefully. Karen Morrison was 45, divorced, and had apparently decided that property lines were just suggestions. She lived alone in the house next to mine with her teenage son Tyler, who seemed embarrassed by his mother most of the time. The first sign of trouble came during my second week in the house. I was planting flowers in my front yard when Karen marched over with a clipboard. "Hi there. I'm Karen, your neighbor. I need you to sign this." She thrust the clipboard at me without any explanation. "What is it?" "Neighborhood Improvement Agreement. We're all committed to maintaining property values here." I glanced at the paper. It was full of rules about lawn maintenance, paint colors, and landscaping choices. None of it was legally binding, but Karen had somehow gotten several neighbors to sign it. "Thanks, but I'll pass," I said politely. Karen's smile froze. "Excuse me?" I said no thanks. "I'll maintain my property just fine without signing anything." That's when I saw the real Karen for the first time. Her face went red, her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Everyone on this street has signed this agreement." "Everyone?" "Well, now everyone except me has signed it," I replied, turning back to my flowers. She stomped away, muttering about property values and community standards. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few months, Karen made it her personal mission to find fault with everything I did. If I left my trash cans out 30 minutes too long, she'd call the city. If my grass was a day overdue for cutting, she'd leave passive-aggressive notes in my mailbox. She complained to the homeowners association about my excessive Christmas decorations, 3 strings of lights and a wreath. She called animal control because my dogs barked when kids walked by the fence. She even tried to get me fined for parking my own car in my own driveway because it was blocking the visual flow of the street. Every complaint was dismissed, but each one required time and energy to deal with. The breaking point came when she started using my backyard as a shortcut. I first noticed it on a Tuesday morning. I was drinking coffee on my back porch when I saw Karen walking across my yard with a bag of garbage. She dumped it in my trash can and walked back to her house like it was perfectly normal. "Excuse me," I called out. "What are you doing?" "Oh, hi," she called back cheerfully. "My trash can is full, so I'm just using yours. We're neighbors. You can't just walk through my yard and use my trash can. Don't be so uptight. It's just trash." She kept walking like the conversation was over. I installed a lock on my trash can that afternoon. The next week, I caught her letting her son's friends use my backyard as a shortcut to get to the park. When I told them to stop, Karen came marching over. "You're being ridiculous. It's just a few kids walking through. What's the harm?" "The harm is that it's my property, not a public walkway." "God, you're so selfish. No wonder you don't have any friends on this street." That stung, but I held my ground. "Stay out of my yard, Karen." She glared at me with pure hatred. "We'll see about that." Which brings me back to that Tuesday evening when I discovered the gate. I stood there staring at it in disbelief. It was a professional job, solid wood, metal hinges, even a little latch. Someone had cut a 3-foot section out of my fence and installed a gate that opened from Karen's yard directly into mine. I walked over and examined it closely. The work was recent. I could still smell fresh wood stain. The cut was clean and the installation was solid. This hadn't been done by some weekend warrior with a saw. This was professional work. I was about to march over to Karen's house when I noticed something else. There was a small plaque mounted next to the gate on her side. I had to lean over the fence to read it. "Community Access Gate, installed by Willowbrook Neighborhood Association for enhanced property connectivity." I actually laughed out loud. It was so ridiculous I couldn't believe it. Karen had somehow convinced herself that she had the right to cut a hole in my fence and install a gate. I pulled out my phone and took pictures from every angle. Then I tried the gate. It opened easily from her side but had no handle on my side. She'd literally built herself a one-way entrance into my property. Time to have a conversation. Karen answered her door with a big fake smile, like she'd been expecting me. Hi neighbor. What can I do for you? You can explain why there's a gate in my fence that I didn't authorize. Oh that. Isn't it wonderful? The neighborhood association approved it last month. It'll make it so much easier for everyone to access the common areas. What common areas? It's my backyard. Well, technically it's a shared space now. The association voted on it. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Karen, there is no neighborhood association. You made that up. And even if there was, they can't vote to give you access to my private property. Her smile finally cracked. Actually, there are easement rights that... No, there aren't. I had a survey done before I bought the house. That fence marks the exact property line. Everything on my side belongs to me. The previous owner agreed. The previous owner told me about your crazy demands. He said no too. Karen's mask finally came off completely. Look, I've been living here for 12 years. I've invested time and money into making this neighborhood better. You show up and suddenly think you can just ignore community standards. Community standards don't include cutting holes in my fence. That gate benefits everyone. My son's friends can get to the park easier. I can access the community garden area. There is no community garden. It's my backyard. You're not even using that space properly. There's room for a playground, a garden, maybe a fire pit area. Instead, you just let your dogs run around. And there it was. Karen didn't just want access to my yard. She wanted to take it over completely. Remove the gate, Karen. Today? Absolutely not. The installation was expensive and the neighborhood supports it. Remove it or I'll remove it myself. You can't. It's community property now. I turned and walked away before I said something I'd regret. That night I did my homework. I pulled out my property deed, survey reports, and city ordinances. I researched fence laws, easement rights, and property boundaries. I wanted to be absolutely sure of my legal ground before I acted. The law was crystal clear. Karen had committed several crimes. 1. Criminal trespass for entering my property without permission. 2. Vandalism for damaging my fence. 3. Criminal mischief for installing the gate without consent. 4. Possibly theft for trying to claim use of my property. I also discovered that any permanent structure installed on someone else's property without permission could be removed by the property owner without notice. But I decided to give Karen one more chance to do the right thing. The next morning, I typed up a formal letter explaining the law and demanding removal of the gate within 48 hours. I had it notarized and delivered it by certified mail. Karen's response came that afternoon in the form of a handwritten note shoved under my door. The gate stays. Deal with it. If you touch it, I'll call the police and sue you for destruction of community property. Okay. That's when I decided Karen needed to learn a lesson about property rights. I spent the next 2 days planning my response carefully. I wanted it to be legal, permanent, and absolutely clear about who owned what. First, I contacted a lawyer to make sure my plan was solid. He reviewed all my documents and Karen's note. She's completely in the wrong, he confirmed. You have every right to remove the gate and secure your property line. In fact, I'd recommend it. What about her threat to call the police? He laughed. Let her call. She's the one who committed crimes here. Next, I got quotes from 3 different contractors for the work I had in mind. The quotes ranged from $3,200 to $4,800, but I was willing to pay for quality. I chose Martinez Construction because they could start immediately and guaranteed the work would be completed in one night. You want us to remove the gate and build a brick wall in the same night? Carlos Martinez asked. That's right. I want her to wake up to a completely different situation. He grinned. I like your style. We can do it. I also contacted the police non-emergency line to give them a heads up. I'm going to be doing construction work on my property line tonight, I explained. My neighbor has been threatening to call you if I touch a gate she illegally installed on my property. I wanted you to know the situation in advance. The officer took down all the details and my case number from the lawyer consultation. Sounds like she's the one with the problem, not you, he said. Thanks for the heads up. Carlos and his crew arrived at 11 p.m. with floodlights, tools, and enough bricks to build a fortress. They worked like a military operation. Quiet, efficient, and professional. First, they carefully removed Karen's gate, preserving it intact. Carlos had suggested this in case we needed evidence later. Always better to have the actual item than just photos, he explained. While two guys worked on removing the gate, the others mixed mortar and prepared the brick foundation. They brought a small concrete mixer that ran surprisingly quietly. By 2 a.m. they had the gate completely removed and the foundation poured. By 4 a.m. the first rows of bricks were in place. By 6 a.m. they had built a solid brick wall 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, completely filling the gap where Karen's gate had been. The wall was beautiful, professional masonry work with clean lines and matching mortar. It looked like it had been there for years. Carlos handed me the removed gate. "Where do you want this?" "Just lean it against the wall on my side. I want her to see it." As the crew packed up their tools, I noticed lights coming on in Karen's house. It was almost 7 a.m., she'd be getting up soon for work. I paid Carlos his fee plus a generous tip for the night work. "This was fun," he said with a big smile. "Call us if you need any more walls built." I was drinking coffee on my back porch when Karen discovered my surprise. I heard her back door slam, then footsteps across her yard, then nothing. Dead silence for about 30 seconds. Then, "What the hell?" I walked over to my new wall and looked over the top. Karen was standing in her yard staring at the brick barrier in complete shock. She looked like someone had just told her gravity had been cancelled. "Morning, Karen," I called cheerfully. She spun around, her face already turning red. "What did you do?" "I secured my property line." "Nice wall, isn't it?" You can't? Where's the gate?" I gestured to where her gate was leaning against my side of the wall. "Right there. Would you like it back?" "Put it back. Right now." "I don't think so. That gate was installed on my property without permission. I've removed it." "I'll call the police." "Go ahead. I already talked to them." That seemed to deflate her a little. "You, what?" "I called the police yesterday to let them know I'd be removing an illegal structure from my property. They said it sounded reasonable." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She genuinely seemed to be having trouble processing what had happened. This is illegal. You can't build walls without permits." "Actually, I can. Property line fences under 6 feet don't require permits in this city." I checked. But, the neighborhood association approved the gate." "Karen, for the last time, there is no neighborhood association. You made that up." She stood there sputtering for another minute, then stomped back into her house. I could hear her yelling on the phone, probably trying to find someone who would tell her she was right. I finished my coffee in peace. Karen's first call was to the police, just like she'd threatened. 2 officers showed up around 10 a.m. while I was working in my front yard. "Mr. Johnson? We got a call about a property dispute." "Yes, officers. I spoke with your department yesterday about this situation." I showed them my property survey, the photos of Karen's illegal gate, and the lawyer's letter confirming my rights. One officer walked the property line with his measuring tape while the other examined the removed gate. "Your neighbor is claiming you destroyed community property," the first officer said. "There's no such thing as community property here. She installed that gate on my land without permission. I have every right to remove it." The officer who'd been measuring came back shaking his head. "The wall is exactly on the property line. And ma'am," he called to Karen, who was watching from her window, "there's no record of any easement or community property designation for this address." They left after giving Karen a warning about filing false police reports. Her second call was to the City Code Enforcement Office. The inspector showed up that afternoon. "Got a complaint about an unpermitted structure," he said. I showed him the same documentation. He measured the wall height, under the permit requirement, and checked that it wasn't blocking any utilities or drainage. "Looks good to me," he concluded. "Nice work actually." Karen's third call was to a lawyer. I know this because she told everyone who would listen that she was exploring legal options. The lawyer apparently told her the same thing mine had told me. She didn't have a case. But Karen wasn't done yet. Karen's next move was to try social media justice. She posted a long rant in the neighborhood Facebook group about my destruction of community property and antisocial behavior. The post included photos of the brick wall and a dramatic story about how I'd stolen community space and destroyed improvements that benefited everyone. She probably expected an outpouring of support. Instead, she got roasted. "Wait, you cut a hole in his fence without permission?" Sarah M. "How is his backyard community property?" Mike R. "Karen, you can't just decide someone else's yard belongs to the neighborhood." Jennifer L. "This sounds like trespassing to me." David K. The comments kept coming and they weren't in Karen's favor. Several neighbors shared their own stories about Karen's entitled behavior, complaints about their decorations, demands to use their driveways, attempts to claim parts of their yards for community use. It turned out Karen had been pulling this stuff with multiple neighbors, but I was the first one to push back hard enough to stop her. The Facebook post backfired so completely that Karen deleted it within 6 hours. But screenshots live forever and several people had saved them. Karen's next move was even more desperate. She started leaving notes on cars parked on our street, asking neighbors to support her in a property rights dispute with me. The notes claimed I had illegally seized community space and asked people to sign a petition demanding I restore neighborhood access. Nobody signed it. In fact, several neighbors brought the notes to me apologizing for Karen's behavior. "She's always been weird about property lines," said Mrs. Chin from across the street. "Last year she tried to tell me my rose bushes were encroaching on community sight lines." Karen's last desperate attempt came 2 weeks after the wall was built. I was grilling dinner in my backyard when I heard power tools running in her yard. I looked over the wall and saw Karen with a rented concrete saw, trying to cut through my new brick wall. "Karen, what are you doing?" She looked up with wild eyes covered in brick dust. "Restoring community access. You're destroying my property. Stop immediately. This wall is illegal. I'm fixing the neighborhood." I called 911 while she kept cutting. By the time police arrived, she'd managed to cut about 6 inches into the wall before the blade got stuck. This time they arrested her. The charges were serious: criminal mischief, destruction of property, and violation of the earlier warning about false reports. The property damage was over $500, making it a felony. I watched from my front yard as they led Karen away in handcuffs. Several neighbors had come out to see what was happening. The embarrassment on her face was total. Tyler, her teenage son, stood in their front yard looking mortified. I felt bad for the kid. None of this was his fault. Karen spent 3 days in jail before making bail. When she got out, there was a "for sale" sign in her front yard. The criminal charges stuck. She pled guilty to avoid trial and got 6 months of probation, community service, and had to pay restitution for repairing the wall damage. But the real consequence was social. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood about Karen's arrest for trying to destroy my wall. The Facebook screenshots had been shared in other local groups. She'd become infamous as the crazy neighbor who tried to steal someone's backyard. She couldn't show her face in public without people staring and whispering. Tyler came over a few days before they moved to apologize for his mother's behavior. "She's always been like this," he said sadly. "But it's gotten worse since the divorce. I'm glad I'm going away to college next year." "None of this is your fault," I told him. "You seem like a good kid." "Thanks. And hey, nice wall. It looks really professional." I gave him my contractor's card in case he ever needed masonry work done. Karen moved out 2 weeks later. I never saw her again, but I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to an apartment complex where she couldn't terrorize property owners. The house sold quickly to a nice young couple with twins. They introduced themselves properly and asked permission before their kids retrieved balls that went over the fence. What a concept. My brick wall became something of a neighborhood legend. People would walk by just to look at the Karen wall and hear the story. Carlos's business got several new customers from neighbors who admired his work. I added some decorative elements to my side of the wall: climbing vines, a small garden, and a bench where I could sit and enjoy my completely private backyard. The wall served its purpose perfectly. It marked the exact property line, looked great, and sent a clear message about boundaries. But the real victory wasn't the wall itself. It was watching an entitled bully finally face consequences for her actions. Karen had spent years pushing neighbors around, taking what didn't belong to her, and trying to control everyone else's property. She thought she could cut a hole in my fence and claim part of my yard because nobody had ever stopped her before. She learned the hard way that property rights aren't suggestions, and some people will fight back when pushed too far. The best part was how quickly the truth came out once I stood my ground. All those neighbors who'd quietly dealt with Karen's nonsense for years suddenly found their voices. Her arrest for trying to destroy my wall was just the final straw that broke her hold on the neighborhood. It's been 6 months since Karen moved away, and the difference in the neighborhood is remarkable. People are friendlier, more relaxed. There are no more passive-aggressive notes about lawn maintenance or complaints about Christmas decorations. The new neighbors are wonderful. They respect boundaries, ask before borrowing anything, and actually contribute to the community instead of trying to control it. My brick wall stands strong and beautiful, a permanent reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to build an unmovable barrier between you and their nonsense. I still get comments from people walking by. "Is this the famous Karen wall?" they ask. I always smile and tell them the story. It's become a cautionary tale about what happens when entitled people push too far. Karen thought she could take whatever she wanted and face no consequences. She thought wrong. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's building something permanent that makes it impossible for the problem to ever happen again. My dogs love the new setup too. They can run and play in complete privacy, without worrying about entitled neighbors walking through their space. Every morning when I drink my coffee on the back porch, I look at that beautiful brick wall and remember Karen's shocked face when she discovered it. The memory never gets old. Property lines matter. Boundaries matter. And sometimes, when someone refuses to respect either, you have to build a wall to make your point crystal clear. Karen learned that lesson the hard way. And thanks to that wall, she'll never have the chance to forget it.